you want to ensure that you're going to hire someone who has done the exact job that you have in front of you. And so, for example, if you had a kitchen fire and the fire was extensive enough to where you're going to have to completely rip out everything, you're going to have to put in new mechanicals, you're going to have to do new drywall. You want someone who's done that job before. Welcome to the Ryan Rice Show, where we talk about what we learned yesterday that we can apply today so that we can be better tomorrow. I hope you enjoy and subscribe. I get asked a lot what I think about firehouses. And when I say a firehouse, I mean the house has a fire, you have it in contract or offering on it. You're trying to figure out if you should purchase it to flip it or turn it into a rental. And I've done 3 firehouses, and they were all significant fires. And I'm going to share my learnings here with you so that you can know everything that you need to know about having to go through that grueling experience. Who am I? My name is Ryan Rice. I'm a real estate investor. I am in my 4th year investing full time. And I've done a lot of rehabs, and a lot of them have been extensive, including firehouses, extensions, additions, full gut rehabs. And I have had the unfortunate, the unfortunate pleasure of doing so many. And I share a lot of these lessons with you so that you can hopefully get the learnings without the scars that I have. So before I get into the tactical things that I've learned about firehouses, I want to touch on risk for a second. And I talk about this first for a reason. Most important, if you are a newbie or if you do not have a ton of experience flipping houses, you don't have a lot of experience in construction, the first thing you have to understand is that the inherent risk is significantly higher. There's a lot more unknowns, and you're going to learn a lot in this experiences. You're going to learn a lot in this experience. And houses that have had a fire just have a higher probability of being a very expensive lesson. And so if you haven't done several rehabs, I wouldn't recommend that this is a rehab that you start out on as a newbie. There's just way too many things to learn. There's way too many things that can go wrong. And you don't want to get a very expensive tuition bill. And if you can get the experience without this elevated inherent risk, in other words, if you can get experience flipping houses doing something that's a little bit simpler, that is what I would suggest doing. Doing a house that has had a big fire without the experience is like the equivalent of playing, like, we'll do a video game analogy. You're playing Super Mario Brothers for the very first time, and you immediately decide that you want to fight the very last boss. So you open the game, you put it in, you start the game, and then you just want to skip to the end and you say, I want to fight Bowser, right? And you don't even know what buttons do what. You don't know how to maneuver the controller. You don't know how the game works. And the probability that Bowser absolutely kicks your ass is just really, really high. And so what to do instead, you start on level 1, and then you learn how the buttons work, and then you go through the game, and then you die a few times, and then you restart. And that just significantly increases the probability that when you come to beat Bowser, or when you come to face Bowser, you're able to actually have a chance at beating him. And even then, you're probably going to die a few times. You're probably going to have to repeat the process. But now the difference between a video game and flipping houses that have had fire damage is, in flipping houses, you have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars that you have hard earned, or one of your investors has hard earned, and you do not want to risk losing it. So there is risk, and just know that before you buy a firehouse. Getting into the learnings, I'm going to cover 3 things. I'm going to cover your timeline, I'm going to cover contractors, and I'm going to cover the rehab itself. So first and foremost, your timeline. When I bought these firehouses, I planned on a 6 to 8 month hold time, which seemed significant to me. That seemed like plenty of time to get the construction done, get it back on the market, and get it sold. And 8 months is much longer than I would plan to hold a normal flip. A lot of flips I do, I get them turned around in 3 to 4 months. We get them sold. So there's not much of a hold time. What I found from a timeline standpoint is that due to people like engineers and permitting and inspections, fixing stuff after inspections, you're going to have a city or county inspector come through. And if all of the work isn't done exactly how they like it, they're going to give you a list of things that you have to redo, and then you have to get it re inspected. And just all of that stuff took a lot longer than anticipated. All three firehouses that I did, they all took longer than 12 months. Now, I didn't have the most optimal contractors for these jobs. And in two of them, I brought in new contractors, which of course extended the timeline. But everything about inspection engineers, all that stuff holds true. And so for your timeline, I would suggest running numbers on a 12-month timeline. 12 months, if the contractor has experience, I think is plenty of time. And had I not had some contractor issues and had to replace my contractors, then 12 months would have been sufficient. So that's the first learning I had is you're going to hold it longer than you expect. And that is normal with a house that has had fire because there's a lot of things that need to happen to make sure that that house is safe for its future owner. Next is your contractors. And this is a very, very important learning that I had, or a very, very important piece to consider before you buy a firehouse. You want to ensure that you're going to hire someone who has done the exact job that you have in front of you. And so, for example, if you had a kitchen fire and the fire was extensive enough to where you're going to have to completely rip out everything, you're going to have to put in new mechanicals, you're going to have to do new drywall. You want someone who's done that job before. And you're going to find contractors out there that they're going to communicate to you that they have done a similar job or that they have experience. And when they tell you, you're going to ask who the owner of the house was for a job like that they did. And then you're going to go find and you're going to go talk to that owner so that you can validate how their experience was. And you're going to ask them questions like, hey, how did this contractor do with the project timeline? Did they deliver on a timeline that you expect, or were there delays? What popped up unexpectedly that delayed your project? How did the contractor do with the city or the county inspection process? Did the contractor have to fix a lot of stuff after the inspector came through, or did he or she get it right the first time? And this is so important. You don't want to hire a contractor that's learning on your job. We've already talked about the inherent risk of a firehouse, and it is significantly higher. And if a contractor is learning on your job because you didn't do the due diligence to ensure that they had the right type of experience, that is going to significantly increase the inherent risk. And there's just too much at stake. So be sure that you hire someone with experience with the scope of work that you have in front of you. And even if you really like them, or let's say you find a contractor who's very charismatic and they seem, when they talk to you, like there's no reason not to believe them, and then they tell you that they have experience with that type of house and you really want to believe them and you kind of trust what it is that they tell you, still ask who the owner of a house was of a recent project that they did with that scope of work, and still go talk to that owner. Real quick, as you guys know, I just recently started this podcast. If you could give it a rating with a quick tap of the thumb, that would mean the world to me. And even more importantly, it could help spread the word to a broader audience, which in turn could help change a life. Thank you so much, and let's get back to the show. And, a quick side note on contractors with charisma. When you come across it, you tend to trust them more naturally because that's not a trait that's super common in the industry. And you're drawn to kind of trust everything that they say. And it's a little bit more intuitive to believe them. And in my experience, those are the contractors who might take advantage of you. And they know that they're charismatic. They know it's not a common trait in the industry. And they're going to use their charisma to convince you to do things like give them money ahead of time, do something that seems a little bit outside of the norm, take their word for it. And you don't want to make decisions based on how you feel. You want to make decisions based on truth and facts. And so if someone has charisma, just go vet that what they're saying is accurate, because they are going to have the ability to take advantage of you. And the last piece is the rehab itself. I haven't done a single firehouse for under $100,000. In other words, all of the rehabs that I've done that have had extensive fire damage, I've spent well over six figures. And granted, all these fires were pretty substantial. And they weren't small cosmetic fires where stuff might have been able to be restored. There was significant. We had to rip out everything, replace everything. And so they were large rehabs. But back to the rehab, you know, in all three, I spent more than I anticipated because what happened is once we got into the project and we started tearing things up, we started doing demo, we found more and more things that we needed to do, which is natural. And it seemed like it was impossible to tell the extent of the damage up front. And so we got in, we started demo, we found more things that we needed to do every single time. Three for three, all three projects. I found more scope of work than I thought there was up front. And so give yourself a good contingency. That's what you can do to accommodate for this unforeseen thing that is likely going to happen. And a good contingency, what I would suggest is my experience was anywhere from 10 to 15% of your total rehab budget is what you are going to find and likely spend over your budget. And something I didn't consider or think about is you're going to have to spend money on people like engineers, right? So they're going to come out to assess and make sure that the house is safe. And you might not know that you have to do this in the beginning, but a county or a city inspector, they're going to come and they're going to say, "Oh, well, I want you to draw plans because that, roof rafter is charred and there's no way to know if it's structurally sound. So I need an engineer." So an engineer is going to have to come out. They're going to have to tell your contractor exactly what to do. And then after the contractor performs the work, a lot of times the city or the county is going to ask the engineer to come back out because they're going to want an engineer's stamp on the work to say that it is done correctly and that it is now safe. And if you're not experienced enough to know how much a firehouse should cost, in other words, you have a bunch of photos or you've walked through a house that has had a significant fire and you're having trouble coming up with what the scope of work what the scope of work is, what kind of things do I need to think about, how do I know how much to budget. The first thing I would encourage you to think about, consider passing on the project, because if you don't have that experience, you don't want an expensive tuition bill. But the second thing, just get as many contractors through the house as possible. If you can get 3 to 5 contractors through the house and they all give you written bids, then you're going to have the ability to take let's say you get 5 bids. You're going to be able to have 5 written bids that have a ton of detail in them. You're going to be able to compare them all, and you can see who might be missing some scope of work that others had and they didn't. And you can ensure that you don't select a lower bid just because the price is attractive, but yet they're missing a large chunk of work. And then you can take those 5 scope of works and you can put the puzzle pieces together on what actually is required to be done. And so this is really important for a few reasons. One, if you have an issue with a contractor, which of course, every contractor you hire, you don't anticipate to ever have an issue, but if you have been rehabbing houses and you have not had to fire a contractor, it's just a matter of time before that happens. But it's so important in this case because in a very large rehab with a high scope of work, if that has to happen, it can be very disruptive. And so having a backup contractor in place who has already provided a written bid, and if something were to happen, you can slide in right behind your first contractor, that is going to be very beneficial. And then two, the second thing that's important about getting a lot of bids is the more people that you have looking at the same house, the more you can identify what might be wrong. Because if you get 5 contractors through the house and they all give you written scope of works and written bids, every single one of them is going to be different. And you can use each scope of work that the contractors put together to have follow-up contractors for the others. And so, for example, let's say you see one contractor scope of work and it says, hey, you need to replace 6 floor joists because where the fire went to, I went and I tested the floor joist and you're going to need to replace it. An inspector is going to call it out. And you're comparing it to another bid and the other contractor doesn't have it on there. Well, you can ask that other contractor, hey, how was the floor? Is there any fire damage to the floor? Do we have to replace any floor joists? And if the contractor says, oh no, the floor is great, I don't think you're going to have to replace anything, you don't need to worry about that, then you know you have a problem. You have either one contractor who thinks it should be done and it shouldn't, or you have another who missed it. And you can find out which one. And by looking at those different scopes of work, you can figure out exactly what it is that you need to do. But that's it. Kind of short and sweet here, but I want to make sure that you don't put yourself into a position where you have this firehouse and the numbers look attractive, and that's why nobody else is offering on it. And it's a big, heavy project for you to get into, and I want to prevent you from losing money. And so to recap, the 3 things that we talked about: 1, plan for an extended timeline, and I would suggest about 12 months. 2, hire a contractor that has experience doing that exact type of job, and don't take their word for it. Even if they're charismatic, go talk to someone that they did that type of job for and validate and confirm what the contractor is telling you. And then lastly, just plan for a larger rehab budget contingency. 10 to 15% should set you straight. And if it's your first firehouse, be sure to get at least 3 to 5 contractor bids so you can compare the scopes of work. But that's it. That's everything I learned. I hope that was helpful. If you know someone who is considering to buy a firehouse, maybe send this to them if you think it would be helpful. But I appreciate you guys listening, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.